Good afternoon, everybody. Well, that's working, isn't it? Welcome back from Thanksgiving break. It's a long break, isn't it? Not long enough? I think it's hard to come back, because after about day 7 or 8, it's like I'm in a routine here that does not involve coming into this building. So anyway, welcome back. We have a few things to do before this semester is over, and I want to pray along those lines here in just a moment. Just a couple of quick announcements. A reminder, those of you enrolled in the music convocation for class. By the way, we have some guests here today. Welcome. This is a regular class, so I've got a couple of class announcements, and then we'll get on with our program, which I think you'll have more interested in than our announcements. But just a reminder, those of you enrolled in the class, it is up to you to be sure you have enough attendances to pass the class. What is the magic number this semester? 18, which means, and again, those of you who are new, you can't get them all on Monday because there aren't enough Mondays. You've got to have some other events in there. The attendance is recorded usually within a week after the event, so I think we're current up to just before the men's chorus concert, I believe. But anyway, you should check and see how many you have and how many opportunities remain to see if you are able to pass Convo. If you fail Convo, you have to take it in the summer. And it is not as easy as taking it during the school year. That's all I'll say about that. So what's coming up, we just have a few events left that are for Convo credit. A week from today, we have an open student recital. We'd encourage you to sign up for that. On Thursday, December 7th, Lakewood Symphony has a concert. That is a Convo event. And then, of course, the Christmas concerts on December 8 and 9. We have that down just as one Convo credit. Don't think of counting that one twice. That's one only. Convocation on December 11th is another open student recital. On December 12th, we have the Christmas Handbells and Strings concert. December 14th, which is a Thursday, the Music Theater and Dance concert. And then we have a final convocation scheduled, which is Corey Mount's half recital and an open student recital for Friday afternoon, December 15th. And that's it. That's all that's left. So if you have shortages, you might want to talk to me this week, not next. Okay? Any other announcements or questions? D. Taylor.
Just a note for those of you who are studying Applied Voice. Due to the scheduling of the juries on Monday and Tuesday of finals week, there are only specific times that some of the companies are available. You will be getting an email, and you will see it posted on the list. You look for your name and look for the time frame you need to sign up for in order for your compass and for your voice teacher to be there. It's quite a complicated issue this time around, so we're actually giving you parameters to say this person needs to sign up during this time frame. So be looking for that and make sure that you follow as best you can. Okay?
And because of that and other things in my schedule, instrumental juries will be on Tuesday this year, not Wednesday. You're thinking ahead to those things. Okay, let me pray, and then I want to say just a brief word of introduction for today and turn it over to Dr. Hudson in just a moment. Lord, I do want to pray for our two students that are going to be leading these projects here in the next little while. I pray that you would be with them, give them a great sense of poise and confidence and freedom, and this would be a good and a learning experience for them and for us. And Lord, I do pray for these remaining 3 weeks. All of us here in this room have a lot to do just to get through the Christmas concert. But we have a lot of other stuff happening. We need your grace, and we ask for your daily bread for each of these days that remain between now and the end of the semester. And we commit the time to you in Jesus' name. Amen. So today is something new, and I'm not going to say a lot about this, but I do want you to be sure that you meet the coordinator of the music ed program here, Dr. Mark Hudson, and he will tell you what is going to happen this afternoon.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back. I'm still recovering from tryptophan overload from the Thanksgiving Day feast. Even though I was in Florida, it was pouring rain at about 50 degrees. Good insulation. That's the way it works. As Professor Dorn indicated, we have a new sort of approach today, and that has to do with a performance project geared towards the music education career that is forthcoming for these two young ladies. I'll tell you a quick story. My first year in teaching of music education in the field as a career was back in 1980. one. And I met the high school band where I was hired for the first time at a preschool band camp out at Camp Crystal Lake. No, not that, where people die. Down in Florida. And if you've never seen those movies, then you're probably better off. We were to meet out there and begin learning music for the upcoming fall season, which consisted primarily of marching band at the time. And not knowing these kids, I knew basically the instrumentation. So I picked out some pieces that I thought would be pretty safe to proceed with and then get a better feel and go on from there. First rehearsal, I'll never forget it. If I live to be 100, which I probably won't. But I gave the downbeat for a piece of music after talking through it and so forth. A fairly easy grade 3 piece of music, 3 out of 7, so on the easy side. It was the worst train wreck I ever heard in my life. And at that moment, I became a true Christian and really began to pray. So it was one of those instances in that, what have I gotten myself into? I had never had an opportunity such as this, nor were there things explained to me that I needed to understand at the time. So hopefully we're doing a better job of that now. So if you're a composer, have you ever been responsible for composing a piece and then hearing it? Anyone here? Okay, a couple. Did you hear what you expected to hear, what you heard in your head? Yes and no. Okay, all right. When composers write, and you can ask Professor Denver about this, when composers write music for a group, they usually follow the Beethoven model, in which he told, on writing a violin concerto, he told the violinist, do you think I consider your pathetic violin when I write music? In essence, they write for the group that is a perfect group, instrumentation, ability, experience, and so forth, that they hear in their head. And it's up to someone else to make it work, if they can. Fortunately, not all school composers are that way, because there are a lot more variables involved in a school music production with young musicians who may or may not have the experience level needed. And when you get into a high school situation, which these pieces were written for, we're talking about grades 9 through 12. So there's a great variety of expertise and experience, desire, enthusiasm, motivation, shall we say, in these types of situations. So it's important to know that what's on the page for the composer was written for an ideal group out there, and the likelihood is you're not going to have one of those, at least not right away. So one of the best things I ever learned in graduate school was you're not tied or anchored to the score. It's not an anchor around your neck and you're tossed into the deep end. You're allowed to make changes as needed to make it work. People listening in the audience, they're not looking at a score usually. So in those cases, you adjust to make it work, and that opens up a lot more possibilities for pieces that your ensemble, no matter what the instrumentation or ability level, can undertake for study and performance. So that's what we did today, for today. We undertook a couple of pieces that these young ladies selected. They are grade 3. One's a little tougher grade 3 than the other. That gives you a nice picture of what I'm speaking of here. Before I move on, I want to say a word of thanks to these folks assembled up here on the stage. I'm going to take a phrase from the Apostle Paul in Philippians 3, I believe it is, when he says, I thank God every time I remember you. And I know these young ladies have the same degree of thanks for you spending your time and talent doing this for them under difficult circumstances in a busy time of the year and just coming back from break. So thank you very much. Can we thank them? So we undertook individually and collectively a study of these pieces. We decided based on the instrumentation and so forth, what changes need to be made prior to the rehearsal. It's also relevant and realistic situation in that with very limited rehearsal time. In this case, only one rehearsal. That rarely happens. At the same time, though, do you ever really have enough rehearsal time? You're always ending up wanting more. And so we had some people who were not able to be at the rehearsal at all. That's not as usual either, but it can happen. So what we're trying to do is make sure that they're thrown into the biggest pool of sharks that they can see in terms of things that could go wrong and work through those things to the best of their ability, and that's what we're doing here today. So we hope that you will think of it in terms of what adjustments needed to be made, and they'll tell you about this with regard to the pieces that they chose to make them work under these circumstances and under this situation, as well as listen to it with a very critical ear, because on the back of each, and please make sure that you get the right name on the front to go with the right form on the back. We're asking you to evaluate the performance today. What you see on the back here comes from what's called CHASA, Colorado High School Activities Association. This is as realistic as it gets, because if in Colorado you go to a large group festival in high school or even middle school, this is the form that's utilized to evaluate your performance. It's fairly self-explanatory. You don't need to put your name on it. You don't need to make comments unless you wish to do so. But please do evaluate in the rubric across the top. Consistently demonstrates proper balance plan, et cetera, et cetera. Frequently, sometimes, rarely, never. That's not going to happen, by the way. So please give us your evaluation of both these performances. We'll take those up as you leave today. And thank you for providing input in a very realistic and relevant situation for these young ladies. And we'll begin with Katie Mason.
For coming out today and really supporting me and Megan, especially since, well, like both Dr. Hudson and Mr. Dunn said, this is a brand new thing for us. We had no idea what we were doing a couple months ago. But yeah, so, scripture. We will be showing you a professional recording first of the piece that we prepared for you. We will show you a couple of videos of the rehearsal that we had. We will explain what kind of outside work was necessary to prepare for the rehearsal we had. I'll talk about what sort of things we worked on in the rehearsal along with those video clips. And then we will finish by performing the piece for you. The piece that I have chosen is Air for Band by Frank Erickson. So just a little bit about Frank Erickson first. He lived from 1923 to 1966. And not only was he a composer, but he also was an arranger and a conductor. He was in the U.S. Air Force Army Band, and he arranged for that band. It was in 1956 that he wrote Air for Band. So first I'm going to pull up the professional recording, which is done by the North Texas Wind Symphony. Give me just a second. So for this rehearsal, we had about half of our volunteer band members, they were unable to attend. So I'm not exactly sure if it's going to sound quite as good as that. But to prepare for this rehearsal, I had to do a score study, which basically means I had to look over all the parts for any adjustments I would have to make. And one example of that is we have no French horn players. So had to transpose the horn part and figure out if it would be covered in any other of the instrument's parts, just in case, so it wouldn't be missing. But Erickson, when he composed this piece, was aware of small ensembles, especially of young musicians, which may not have all the necessary instrumentation. So everything is doubled, otherwise I would have had to rewrite some parts so that it would be covered. Other adjustments I would have that I did make was in like the third clarinet and the tenor sax part, because there's some really important suspensions, so I had to write in some crescendos and decrescendos to make sure that those were really heard. I'm going to show you our sight reading video. that was our first time reading it all together as a group. So. Had a couple problems during the setup and everything. Obviously, since half the band was missing, but especially we were missing most of our clarinet players, so you could kind of hear in there that I was singing the melody at some parts just so that they could hear that since it was not there at that time. And we only had one rehearsal compared to like 20 to prepare for a concert. There were a couple other sections that needed to be rehearsed. This first one is a clarinet entrance with the melody, because there's a lot of low voices that sustain, and especially during this rehearsal, we only had one clarinet, so making sure that the clarinet part is heard over all these low notes. So we went over that to make sure that everything was heard. I have 2 short clips of this, so we're going to watch those really fast. So what we're looking at is a measure before beat the song we have the dotted half is going to be the whole note. So that. So pick up to the A. melodies that's playing has a lot of sustained notes over the bar and from measure to measure. There's the suspensions, there's the clarinet melody that's trying to get that to come out. So we went over that a couple times. I have 2 more clips of that we're going to watch. Section that we rehearsed was the ending with the accents, and this is generally a mellow and quiet piece with very few dynamic changes and very few accents. So they were unclear of how specifically I wanted it to be accented, and we went over that a couple times to make sure it was all clear. So I have a longer video, a couple minutes, so that's the last one for that.
These percentages of those accents, the accents are good. We're going to be DJ on, and then those accents obviously need together, but also execute the same way. Hear your tongue accent and their accents, should be one or the other.
Okay. Measure for E.
How would you like it?
Let's do that again. Measure 14.
All right, well, that is everything that I have for you. I do want to give a big thank you to Dr. Hudson, because we had no idea what we were doing. We really appreciate it. We couldn't have done this without you, really. So, I'm going to go conduct now. Air for band.
selection day.
Hi guys, so my name is Megan Spalding, for those of you who don't know me. I'm also a senior music education major. Had the privilege of doing this performance project with Katie. And my piece was Amazing Grace by Frank Kelly. So there were some immediate challenges to choosing a piece, especially for a school band with maybe a non-traditional setup. And the three main things we had to take into account were time, first of all, because Katie and I knew right off the bat that probably, especially with our schedules and other people's schedules, that we would only get one rehearsal with our group. So whatever piece we got was hopefully one that has a higher batting average of being achievable in a short amount of time. And while normally you'll have more than one rehearsal, it's still something you have to take into account. If I only have 10 rehearsals with my band, am I going to be able to get them up to this level of playing that I would like them to for this piece? So that was one consideration we had to take into account. I put talent up here. Talent isn't exactly what I meant, but it fit with the T of time. What I meant more was that we had to evaluate the strengths and the weaknesses of our performers. I'm very fortunate in that I've been working with the CC Symphonic Band for the past year in advanced conducting lessons. So I feel like I have a pretty good handle on the strengths and the weaknesses of many of our players, especially our students. So if we were looking at pieces and maybe a more technical piece in the time constraints and with the strengths and weaknesses of our players, might not have been more achievable. So we both went with slightly more lyrical pieces that hopefully had a higher batting average. But I think one of the biggest challenges of working with a school band is you have to figure out instrumentation. One of the most common problems in the school band is that you, more often than not, are missing French horns, which are personally my favorite instrument, which is kind of sad when they're missing, but I was probably in 6 or 7 school bands growing up, and if we had one French horn player, it was a big deal. So this is one of the most common problems you'll have to work with in a school band setting. So what to do when you don't have French horns or you don't have an oboe player, and things of that nature. So that is actually the first horn line for Amazing Grace. And we both knew coming into this that we wouldn't have French horns, which is odd because Dr. Schroeder just slipped on the stage. But I did not have Dr. Schroeder's player until about 2 hours ago. One of the other many challenges of being a school band director is when suddenly people can't come to the performance and they tell you the day of. So that is why Dr. Schroeder is here, because one of our supportive players that maybe had more of the horn lines was not able to come, and luckily I was able to use Dr. Schroeder's talents, but I did take into account no horn players when preparing this piece. A little bit of background information. The guy on the left is Frank Kelly. He's a pretty popular band composer, but he also has done works for choir and orchestra as well. I'm traditionally a band kid, so I know him in the band world. He does a lot of arrangements of folk songs like Shenandoah and Simple Gifts. And Amazing Grace is one of his most popular. He wrote it in 1994. The guy on the right is the man who wrote Amazing Grace. I put a little bit more about him in the program notes. A beautifully tragic story about how he came to write Amazing Grace in his own testimony. And if you'd like to read more of this, your program. In terms of rehearsal planning, one of the challenges I mentioned was we would only get one rehearsal, so when are we going to schedule this rehearsal? It was a little bit of a challenge since Katie and I both don't have the most conducive schedule to outside time. So really when we looked at our calendars, there was only one time that would work for us, and we are kind of the people who have to be there. So this was really the only time that worked for the band as well. We did have a bunch of missing people. There was everything from prior commitments like church, which are totally understandable, to some forgetfulness of the rehearsal, which also happens in the school band, unfortunately, and even some people who had to leave early in that case. So scheduling is a big deal. Sometimes you don't really get a choice in the school setting when you're not doing rehearsals outside of the band time, but in terms of preparing for the rehearsal, there's an educational idea that you work backwards. It's called Backward to Design. You look at what you want the band to accomplish and then figure out how you're going to get them there. So that's how we both approached our kind of rehearsal planning. Of course, I mentioned that we have to look at the challenges for the performers. So we each went through our pieces after we had picked them and went through and identified maybe some of the challenges. For some of the people, maybe we wrote in their parts, and circled a rhythm that might be tricky, things like that. I put stars up there. It's something that Dr. Hudson has taught us about sight reading in general, and I thought it was a good idea to go through it as well, since a lot of our members would be sight reading. When I was doing my rehearsal planning process, basically you look for the signs, the symbols, the tempo markings, the articulations, and the rhythms before you read a piece, and it hopefully gives you a higher batting average for achieving what you want. And then the other challenge I knew for the performers is this is a very exposed piece, especially with one player on each part. But even in terms of composition, there's a lot of exposure and a lot of entrances that you have to be confident on, because not everybody has them and really nobody else has them in a lot of cases. So I knew confidence would be an issue. And then there's also some personal preparation as a conductor, where you have to take some serious time and do some in-depth score study, make sure you know where all the tempo changes, the key changes, things like that are, and some interpretation that goes along. There's a measure that gets referenced a lot in my presentation that was a little bit of a pain in rehearsal, in conducting, hopefully not in the performance, but there's just some interpretation that you have to go through as a conductor as well. And you also have to practice conducting. A lot of people don't really think about conducting as a practiced art, but hopefully you practice your conducting so that your players will know what they're doing, because you will know what you're doing. So, if you've never seen a band score before, this is what a band score looks like. It's a little challenging at first, especially when you first delve into conducting studies, to be able to figure out what's all going on at the same time, in time, when there are so many different lines. But this is one of the challenges of being a director. And I'm going to play you how it's supposed to sound. it's a very pretty piece, and a lot of times, especially towards the second half, the melody maybe isn't so obvious. So even though we might initially think this might be an easier piece because of the recognizable melody, it is actually surprisingly difficult as a player and as a conductor. So here is what you might call our creative first interpretation of it from sight reading. different from the recording. There were definitely some mistakes on my part as well. I took that about 10 times slower than I wanted to. Didn't realize it till later, and sometimes that just kind of happens as a conductor. Also fell into a conducting pothole at measure 43, that dreaded measure that is a problem everywhere. But other than that, there were some challenges as a player in terms of confidence. Another different thing about me and Katie's rehearsal process was we decided she played the recording and then sight read, and I wanted to see what it sounded like cold, so none of my players, unless they had played the piece or heard it before, had heard it. So that was a bit of a challenge for them as well. It's very thinly orchestrated, as well as we were missing some crucial parts during that one rehearsal. About half of our players weren't there, including our percussionists, both of them, and all of our clarinet players, including our bass clarinet. And there are a lot of times when the clarinet really carries the melody or the form of the melody that's being played. So not only does it throw the band off when that part is missing, but it throws your ear off as a conductor as well in terms of going, oh, is this a mistake of the band, a mistake of me, or just a missing part? So thorough preparation is really important, especially when you get to moments like this. As I said, there were some rehearsal issues. We hope that rehearsing will fix everything that we wanted to fix, but sometimes it doesn't. Hopefully it fixed enough for our performance today. And about half of our players are sight reading as well, so hopefully they were listening really carefully when they listened to the first recording. This might help them out a little bit. I do not have a bunch of rehearsal clips, because I like to think one of the first rules of being a teacher is if your technology can go wrong, it will. And mine happened to. So rather than going through rehearsal clips, I just decided to maybe talk a little bit more in my presentation. The three main things that we rehearsed were more a matter of running it rather than drilling some technical issues. A lot of it was just going through sections and going, I know it sounds weird, this part is missing, you are playing it right, it just doesn't sound right. So there was a lot of going through parts like that. There was a large section of time where we went through this section at measure 43 where there's a breath mark that can be interpreted a few different ways. Kelly actually has in his program notes how to interpret it. I won't go into all that because she can't see the music, so it would be a little hard to go into it. But it is not the easiest to conduct. So not only was I working through it, but my group was working through it, and so that was one of the challenges we had to work through. And there are also several accents in this. They're maybe a little bit different than the accents in Katie's piece, which we had rehearsed first. So we had a lot of moments where we just had to go, make sure this is a bell tone accent, this isn't a breath accent, just give it a little more oomph. And yeah, a lot more running versus drilling. So, just a few challenges that we had leading up to the performance. The first one is a lot of my players, believe it or not, have not probably picked up their instruments since before Thanksgiving break, and it is a fact, and it's an okay fact. It's not maybe what we desire as teachers sometimes, but we have to keep in mind that that may be the most realistic expectation is that maybe they practice once or twice if they practice at all. So many of my players are coming into this maybe cold, so that was definitely a challenge. The fact that half my players are sight reading is definitely a challenge for them as well as me. So hopefully we will hear what we desire to hear, and if not, hopefully we play it off well. And then, of course, technology never works when you need it to. And so for me, the challenges of the video not working all the way up until this performance were definitely a challenge for me. And so without further ado, I'm going to present you the final result. This is Amazing Grace by Frank DeKelly.
appreciate these evaluation sheets, you can turn those in, drop them on the stand. As you go by, hope you have learned something about how tough this stuff is we do call people. Have a great day. Thank you.